Well, let's get into this Iran war buildup, because I'm kind of getting whiplash with Trump's. He's all on board with this coup in Venezuela. It's now 4 months in the making, trying to install this puppet Juan Guaido. We're going to do a whole episode about the Venezuela Embassy Collective with Anya Parampil, journalist who was there, living there for 10 days with the activists who were holding down the fort. And we'll get more into that coup in the next episode of Media Roots Radio. But, at the same time, Robbie, Trump is trying to foment war against Iran. And, you have all these kind of shit takes calling Bolton this architect and this mastermind behind the war with Iran. And look, we all have to face the fact that Trump himself campaigned on warmongering against Iran. He campaigned on abolishing the Iran nuclear deal. He campaigned on literally going to war with Iran, saying several times, we're going to blow them out of the water. I mean, just genocidal rhetoric here. And we know how much he hates Iran, and that's exactly precisely why he picked someone like a John Bolton to lead and be his main foreign policy advisor. He wouldn't have picked John Bolton to articulate his crazy-ass views if he didn't like John Bolton's views and didn't agree with his views. I think that he sees someone like John Bolton as someone who's able to articulate what he wants pretty lucidly. He sees him on TV, he sees him on Fox News, and he was like, I like that guy. He's going to be able to explain what I want and my policies on Iran. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. But for some reason, you have everyone from Democracy Now! To kind of all these like progressive leaning outlets even kind of absolving Trump again and saying, John Bolton, it's John Bolton's world. Trump's just living in it.
Yeah, there's all these weird narratives. And I wonder if it's strategically put out by the Trump administration by design somehow to get people to talk about things in this way. And I'll just give you one example as to why I think that. There was a recent headline by Reuters saying that the Trump administration, or that Bolton's saber rattling with Iran or like belligerence towards Iran has like scared Iran and put them like on edge, but they're counting on the fact that they can like appeal to like Trump's unwillingness or like not wanting to do this. And I read the article, and there didn't seem to be like any quotes from any Iranian officials. It was mostly just like based on leaks or something. But it's strange that if that's actually true, if the Iranian officials like think that there's like a dynamic of like good cop, bad cop, then that benefits the Trump administration. So this big stick approach thing, just the idea that Trump could have this attack dog and still actually have the media portray him as like being hesitant to go to war, and then Bolton's the one trying to like push him into war. It's a very useful dynamic even for like geopolitical affairs. It could create like a bad cop, good cop, like fake back and forth. Like he could maybe send Bolton to talk to someone, and then Bolton could act really belligerent towards them, and then and then they just want to talk to Trump directly, and then he'll tell them something different. I mean, I don't really know what actually is going on behind the scenes, but it is strange the way that, like you're saying, all these media outlets, including Democracy Now!, including a lot of progressive outlets, are just saying this is all Bolton, and he's the one being belligerent, and he's pushing Trump into war, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's like the number one thing that they're basing this on is baseless isolationist rhetoric of like criticism of the Iraq war during the campaign. I mean, as I've articulated and investigated, because of the lack of investigation into Trump's foreign policy, it's the complete opposite of anti-interventionism. He has ramped up troop levels. The quote-unquote troop drawl was simply troops that he himself added, at the same time expanding the criminal occupation of Iraq, at the same time doubling civilian casualties, quadrupling drone strikes. The list goes on and on. But my question is, yeah, his heavy criticism of the Iraq war gained him points that people are still somehow holding on to, including progressives. Why did he personally appoint the main architect to the same war as his national security advisor?
Because, Abby, it's big stick. He's just trying to threaten other countries, and he's not really going to follow through on it. I mean, that it does seem like a lot of people kind of maybe even think in that framework. No, it's totally ridiculous. I mean, you would think that as soon as he appointed John Bolton, everybody would be like, oh, okay, all the stuff he was saying about being anti-intervention is totally fake. But instead, the narrative persists even as he's trying to make war with Venezuela and Iran at the same time. It still persists. It's all John Bolton's fault. It's all Mike Pompeo's fault. I saw maybe about a dozen tweets from different progressives and leftists calling it Pompeo and Bolton's coup. This is all Pompeo and Bolton. They're going to own this, quagmire if they do this in Iran. I mean, talking about Venezuela and Iran. And it's just like, what happened to Trump? I don't remember the same people talking about things done under the Obama administration as only done by Hillary or Victoria Nuland. Obama, once the Ukraine coup happened and there was U.S. involvement, Obama owned that.
Obama owned the shit out of that,
He owned the Ukraine coup. And guess what? A lot of adversarial anti-imperialist media correctly identified that this was the Obama administration and U.S. government meddling in Ukraine. They didn't say that it was Hillary or it was Victoria Nuland by herself doing it.
And Obama was arguably more of a puppet. I mean, he was a freshman senator.
Exactly.
He essentially had no political history. Trump has been weaving in and out of the political arena as donors and operatives for decades as this mogul. And what this rhetoric does is gets Trump and his far right base off the hook because they continue to pat themselves on the back being like, it's not Trump, it's Bolton. It's the deep state, Robbie. Anyone who is astute and who's following neoconservatism like you have been so rigorously understands that Bolton is a functionary for a neoconservative ideology, for a political movement that is represented by, right-wing billionaires, the defense industry. He's not even just some isolated guy. It's not Bolton's wanted war with Iran since he was born. It's Bolton is representing a class interest that's represented by an entire industry.
Yeah.
Bolton is the representative for other people. But yeah, it's so bizarre. It is so bizarre that this just keeps getting Trump off the hook. He didn't want this coup in Venezuela, Robbie. It was Bolton who wanted the coup. Well, it seems weird that he wouldn't just fire Bolton like he does everyone else that he has a small problem with.
Or there were leaks coming out claiming that he was thinking about it. And then what did he tweet right after that? He tweeted, he cleared up the fact that all of this is being done with his approval. He said the fake news Washington Post and even more fake New York Times are writing stories that there's infighting with respect to my strong policy in the Middle East. There's no infighting whatsoever. Different opinions are expressed and I make a decisive and final decision. It's a simple process. I'm sure that Iran will want to talk soon. And look no further to that guy being like, President, are we going to war with Iran? And he was like, hope not. Or maybe. Yeah. Oh, he said something even weirder. I was trying to find the video earlier and I couldn't find it again. So the New York Times, I think it was about 4 or 5 days ago, leaked a report that the Trump administration was working up plans to send 120,000 troops to the Middle East to prepare for an attack in Iran. This actually included no ground force troops for an actual invasion of Iran, because some estimates put that number at over 500,000 that would be needed. So after this leak came out in the New York Times, Trump was asked at a White House lawn little presser. Somebody said, is the New York Times report about sending 120,000 troops to Iran, is that true, Mr. President? Are you planning to do that? And Trump said something like, oh, the New York Times? That story came out in the New York Times. We know the New York Times is fake news, and believe me, if we did plan to do that, we'd be sending a hell of a lot more troops than that. So it's kind of he's still able to spin shit to his advantage. He's using the fake news trope. He's trying to muddy the waters and send out mixed signals. It almost seems like this is the first time I feel like Trump is actually deliberately trying to send out mixed signals and act like simultaneously he doesn't want war with Iran, but that he's ready to strike them really hard and real strong, real fast, at the same time.
Well, Trump is a genius. I mean, he understands how to play the media. If there's nothing else that he's good at, it's that. And deflecting his worst failures, that's how he does it. It's if something fails, he'll just blame someone else, but then he'll just double down on the rhetoric and or send mixed signals so you don't even know what's going on.
Exactly. And that's something I feel like this is the more obvious version of doing that. And it makes me even wonder if some of those leaks about infighting his administration were deliberately put out. I mean, you have to imagine if the Trump administration has had to deal with this many leaks, since the beginning, trying to leak damaging shit about them. then on some level they must be trying to prevent it by putting out like purposeful disinfo to see who's leaking it, or even just doing it just to muddy the waters even more or something. They want to have control. So who knows if these stories about infighting are designed to create that, both realities, that Trump is not a hawk and that Bolton is pushing him into war, and that also Trump is a hawk and wants war with Iran. Like, both narratives are useful for him.
It's super fascinating.
This Iran war buildup really all started with, well, I guess a few different things. I mean, it's hard to say exactly where it started recently, but there was a few incidents which could explain it. The Trump administration obviously, tore up the Iran deal. They put these new demands, they put new sanctions on Iran, and then also new demands, like saying like, we will lift and back off on these, further sanctions if you comply with all these demands. And they were like impossible to meet, ridiculous demands that were by design, made to be impossible to meet. So the Trump administration's already done that. They've already been trying to drum up war rhetoric with Iran. They've even said that Iran had a presence in Venezuela, like terrorists had a presence there. They've already tried to say Iran is the biggest exporter of terrorism. We already know Newt Gingrich, John Bolton, and Rudy Giuliani, 3 people closely associated with the Trump administration, were all paid MEK speakers. And if you don't know who MEK is, look them up. This is all sort of instrumental in our attempts to do regime change in Iran. But one of the big incidents that happened was from a couple months ago, and this sort of went under the radar. It was apparently a drone bomb attack happened against soldiers that were working for the Saudi coalition in Yemen by Houthi rebels. And there's like a videotape of it.
Is that confirmed? Because I could not believe that was even real.
Well, no, I mean, who knows if it's confirmed?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
It, the attribution, I have no idea how they figured that out. It seems manufactured to me. There is video of it actually happening though. So like it really, whatever it was, it did happen.
Something
I
happened.
just watched the video.
Right.
And it's weird as fuck. I mean, just the idea of a drone bomb attack. The last time that happened was against Maduro. It failed in Venezuela. It's just strange. And it even gets stranger because the main thing that provoked all this recent rhetoric was 2 things. The first thing being an attack on Saudi oil tankers, an alleged attack. If you look at the photographs of these Saudi oil tankers, the damage actually didn't injure or kill any human beings, first of all. So for us to even be like using like this to even be going around the media as like a serious thing is strange already, because nobody died. The damage to the ships shown in these photographs looks extremely minor compared to what we've seen before of like the alleged USS Cole bombing incident with a giant hole in the side of the ship. This is like a tiny little rip in the side of the ship, and it looks like it really could have been from anything. I don't know if they're saying it's a bomb. I think that is what they're saying, but it doesn't, it looks like it could have just hit a rock if you look at the pictures.
Hell?
U.S. officials, and the other incident that happened, and this came from apparently Israeli intelligence. So Israeli intelligence is sharing this with the U.S. government, allegedly, that American military officials in Iraq are under threat of an Iranian attack based on this Israeli intelligence intercept. And Israel claims they intercepted a call between an Iranian commander directing militias to attack U.S. troops in Iraq. And in response to this, both of these incidents, heightened the tensions or whatever, according to the Trump administration. So the Trump administration responded by quickly sending American personnel out of Iraq, a bunch of American soldiers and personnel, in lieu of these supposed warnings. And this is from the World Socialist website. It says, quote, sources in Baghdad reported that all day Wednesday, helicopters were ferrying U.S. personnel from the embassy on the Tigris River, the largest such U.S. facility in the world, to a U.S. military base at the Baghdad airport. The last time such an evacuation was ordered was in 2014 after ISIS had captured Mosul, Iraq's second largest city, and appeared poised to march on Baghdad. And so these were the 2 different incidents that apparently escalated this to the point where the Trump administration sent attack carriers led by the USS Lincoln into the Arabian Sea as a show of force to Iran. And pulling out all these people obviously is like a big deal. It's not It's not something just, to be taken lightly. So why are they doing this? Is any of this based on credible information? It just seems awfully convenient that this is all happening sort of at once. What's interesting is right out of the gates and I say all happening at once. I mean, this New York Times report that I mentioned earlier about the 120,000 troops leaked just a few days before this Saudi oil tanker attack thing happened.
Oh, wow. That's really weird.
Yeah. So
that's very suspect for sure.
Yeah. So what's interesting is right out of the gates, the New York Times, even in their initial report and subsequent mainstream media reports on CNN, MSNBC, they were all kind of like acting like this would be a really bad idea and that it was based on really flimsy evidence. When I say they were all acting like that, I exaggerate that. I just saw certain pundits and like desk reporters, random people, kind of being incredulous towards the Trump administration's information about this, which is a difference between the way the media has treated Venezuela and Syria before this. So I was surprised to see that right out of the gates. I was kind of like, oh, that's interesting. So at first I was like really concerned that we were on the precipice of war with Iran. But when
we've been concerned about that for a long time.
Well, yeah. It's been like a slow, we've been on the edge of this for a long time. It's almost like we have fatigue from it. But the mainstream media not going along with it and being lockstep with these war-making maneuvers gave me some hope that something about this is different and it might not actually go off. I would be surprised actually if the Trump administration did it with no mainstream media support whatsoever. Like even if they did it with, that would surprise me. So I do feel like that's a hopeful sign here. And this is just an example of what I'm talking about.
Yeah, go ahead.
In a really rare move, a top British general who happened to be at the Pentagon the day that these personnel were removed from Iraq, speaking to the media, reporters live on camera, he basically completely debunks the allegations that there's these new threats to personnel in Iraq. And the U.S. government had to send out another general to the Pentagon press corps to like rebut the British general. So that already shows you that something is not lockstep here. They're not getting their story straight. You would think that a British general would be on board with this, or he would just echo the U.S. propaganda. So that's interesting.
I just wanted to say really quickly that it is interesting that they're using the Saudi attack as somehow trying to foment like, okay, now we have to do something, because at this point, everyone hates Saudi Arabia. No one sympathizes with them whatsoever. And also, like, the establishment press is, like, very up in arms about the Khashoggi dismemberment in the embassy and, like, Trump's non-response to that and stuff. So I find it odd that this provocation would be centered around an attack on this Saudi tanker, because it's like, who gives a fuck? Like, would anyone really even care? And, like, how would you rationalize reacting as from the U.S. military because of this? I feel like there would be no support at all, even within the political establishment. It'd be very hard to convince people to do that.
It seems really sloppy and weird, doesn't it? That they're trying to use that as a provocation. I mean, like you said, first of all, who gives a flying fuck if Saudi oil tankers were, even if you're like the most conservative person ever.
Right. Yeah.
Like who cares? Even if they're sort of totally true and above board, which first of all, we cannot trust it on its face. But if we took what U.S. officials are saying at face value, do they really think Americans will care at all that Saudi oil tankers got fucked around with? So that's odd. Is this,
hilarious.
So you have to wonder, is this really how sloppy the play is to try and drum up support for a strike on Iran? I mean, again, I don't know if this is the Trump administration being sloppy or what, but there are some other examples of this just not being lockstep and the establishment not being on board with it. And I even mean like establishment neocons. David Frum wrote an editorial saying that it would be a terrible idea to strike Iran. And in the editorial, it's the most arrogant, disgusting bullshit ever. I mean, he's a piece of shit monster who's basically saying that the difference between this and Iraq is that Iraq was justified, and there was a climate of understandable fear after 9/11. We can't let Saddam get weapons or all this, all this bullshit. But in it, he's basically saying that the Trump administration shouldn't do this, and it's a really bad idea. And it's just strange. I mean, it's strange because in their hearts, the neocons really do want regime change in Iran. And is this just more about, them not wanting to get involved in a quagmire? So they'll like latch their names onto something that makes them look bad based on their experience with Iraq? I mean, what is it like? Why would David Frum even write an editorial about this? People like Bill Kristol are being smart. They're just not saying anything because damn well that Bill Kristol would.
Well, I think the optics are so bad, even for neoconservatives who've been vying for war with Iran this whole time, because it's just like it's so random. And again, because it's centered around Saudi instead of like the Saudi oil tankers specifically, it's like not even an attack on Saudi Arabia where people died and stuff.
Yeah.
It's like so beyond the pale of like even the propaganda that would be peddled for humanitarian means or anything, or even like bloodthirsty neoconservative means. It's like totally random, an attack on property, and everyone hates Saudi Arabia, especially like thinks it's disgusting that we have this oil partnership with them. So I feel like even the neocons are like, this is a really bad move, dude.
Yeah,
like let's do it, but like not this way.
I wonder, part of me is wondering who would this outrage the most? It would probably outrage like people in the oil industry the most. Because they'd be like, God damn it, now the terrorists are like fucking with our profits. So it is interesting that that's the play they're going with. Because none of Trump's base, I think Trump's base is mostly smart enough to just not give a shit.
Oh my God, yeah.
But I mean, if he did launch an attack in Iran, they'd go along with it. But I mean, like this rhetoric to try to get us into war with Iran is not going to work. I don't even think on his base. So that's what gives me some hope here. And there's also other strange reports coming out that to me are very surprising, more surprising than even David Frum writing an editorial against this, that it might be so sloppy that apparently even Netanyahu, according to leaks from his inner circle, said he would not directly support any U.S. strikes on Iran. That's really surprising to me. Because we have Netanyahu just a year ago saying that Iran wants to kill 6 million Jews and trying to make it seem like Iran wants to take all the Jews out and kill them all and all this stuff. So, what's really going on here? It's the more I dive into this, the more confusing it gets, because at first it seemed like, oh yeah, Trump is just saber rattling again. The most annoying part of it was how everything was getting blamed on Bolton and Trump was being absolved of this. But then now it's just like, what are they actually trying to do? They are turning up the heat. That's obvious. These new sanctions, tearing up the deal. But what is the actual goal here? I mean, I do think Trump is egotistical enough where it's not that he's anti-intervention or anti-war. I think this is something that I think you and Mike said before, is that he's getting us into like a quagmire that makes us look bad. He wants to get in there, hit him fast, hit him strong, hit him hard. Take out as many people as possible without as little damage and blowback to us as possible, politically or whatever else.
Right. That's what I mean. If any of that was true, the leaks coming out of the administration about just him being annoyed mildly at John Bolton because the Venezuela coup wasn't going as planned, like, yeah, I can see that, because he just, he's pissed that it actually didn't go quickly. It's not that he didn't want the coup. It's that he is annoyed that it's taking so long because he didn't understand the resilience of the Venezuelan people. It's
a prolonged affair. I mean, he doesn't want that.
Yeah, and he said that in the campaign trail too. He said time and again, he was like, we should have gotten their oil. He was like, do you see how fast they put up fucking rigs? He's like, we could go and just take out their oil tankers and put up our own. He's like, immediately. He's like, in and out. I mean, it was clear that the only thing that he didn't like about the wars is that they were too long. And that he thought that he could manage them better, just like he thought he could manage the Notre Dame fire by airlifting water and pouring it on the building, even though the French fire department was like, that would ruin the entire building. We obviously thought of that, you dumbass. So that's just what he thinks. He thinks that he can do something better than everyone else, and he doesn't understand how these things actually work, and like he doesn't assess the countries that he's trying to go to war with properly.
Well, it's wildly inconsistent. I mean, he also blames Obama for pulling out the troops from Iraq and creating ISIS.
Oh, yeah. No, of course, on the same time, because, at the same time, he's totally fine with us still being in Iraq, even though it's like the second in command of the longest war ever. But I mean, the sanctions on Iran, he's upping those like every couple months too. Genocidal sanctions that have killed, 40,000 Venezuelans since August of 2017. He's doing the same type of sanctions in Iran, trying to just suffocate the population that way. Aside from all of this going on, it's just stunning what he's doing with sanctions there.
Yeah, weren't there just power outages in Venezuela like last month, and then like power outages in Iran this month?
Oh, I didn't hear that there were. Wow.
I mean, I might be remembering incorrectly, but it seemed like they were trying to send them a message. I mean, there's little things happening here behind the scenes that we need to pay attention to also. I mean, why is it that Reuters has a story going right now saying that the Iranian government is hoping that Trump is more reasonable than Bolton, and that they can like reason with him or appeal to his, anti-war tendencies? I mean, that's just a strange narrative in and of itself. Because if that's true, like I was saying, then that means a lot of this narrative in general about Bolton being the guy who's behind this is meant to conveniently serve some kind of purpose here, some negotiating tactic, purpose. So
yeah, exactly.
But it's almost giving Trump too much credit at the same time, like he's the art of the deal, deal maker or something.
Right.
But I don't really know what's going on here. I mean, but I do have some hope. Oh, and then actually more hopeful stuff that I don't even think I had a chance to put in the notes here. So I don't even know if you've heard this, Abby, is that Lindsey Graham and Marco Rubio are even complaining that Trump is not keeping them in the loop enough about these threats, these Iran threats.
That's hilarious.
Lindsey Graham, this is some funny quotes he said. He's
good.
like, Lindsey Graham's like, no, I feel like we haven't been well informed. And I'm writing a letter with Senator Leahy today to try to get a briefing. And then he says, I don't think it's fair for us to walk around wondering. And then someone asked him what he thinks about the New York Times leaked story about the 120,000 troops in the Middle East. Graham said, I don't know. I just know what I read. The president has said it wasn't true. And then he says, we're clearly moving people. That's a big deal. So he goes on and on. I mean, basically, he's just complaining. Here's what Marco Rubio had to say, a little bit of a lighter touch. He says, my understanding is that there will be a briefing early next week, but I don't know where we'll be going by early next week. I hope I'm wrong. We could be full blown into this thing. It's a much more urgent situation that I think is being reflected. I'm surprised there isn't more talk about it. So he's not really criticizing Trump. He's just sort of acting like this is like a movie. Like he's acting like, kind of saber rattling too. And then Tom Cotton on the other side of this is just like, yeah, like we can hit Iran hard and it'll be like a fast, quick and easy war. He's going like full-throated endorsement of this plan.
Wow. Yeah, who's like really behind this right now?
I think Tom Cotton is.
Wow.
And Marco Rubio would be, seemingly, if he had enough information. He's acting kind of like butthurt that he's not in the loop. It's unclear who's fully behind this right now. Actually, that's the interesting thing. Eli Lake and Josh Rogin are both writing editorials kind of making it seem like this is a bad cop, good cop strategy, and that the media is being irresponsible by calling this like a war-making maneuver, because what it really is a deal-making maneuver, and we should allow Trump to have as much leg room as he wants to like put pressure and heat on Iran, because like that's what needs to be done. It's like the Dan Senior quote from A Very Heavy Agenda, where he's like, we're not going to attack Iran, but we want Iran to think that we're going to attack them. Like that's the whole mentality. So in a way, this is sort of like a neocon strategic prism to look through. Oh, and another thing that Trump said was fascinating. To me, this really says it all. I mean, this kind of perfectly goes along the lines of what we're talking about right now. Is Trump just tweeted yesterday, with all the fake and made up news out there, Iran can have no idea what's actually going on! !
Whoa.
What does that tell you?
I mean, yeah, it's kind of like anything can be happening behind the scenes. The whole strategy of let them just fight amongst themselves. Meanwhile, no one really knows. And he said that during the campaign trail too. He's like, I'd never let you know what my real plan is.
Yeah,
like with
he
ISIS.
made fun of Obama, like saying like, oh, here's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
I mean, like a dopey voice. It's really, really strange. And it makes me wonder now if Trump realizes that it's not just to deflect criticism against him, the power of using that, that's fake news as a deflection. He can also use it to actually like change world events. I mean, it opens up a whole new world of possibilities for how a politician can do these kind of things. I don't know. It's just, to me, it's fascinating.
Right. I mean, wow, I have no idea what to think. So confusing.
Mm-hmm. And also, I mean, to the mainstream media's credit, for some reason, maybe because, as you said, this is based off of a Saudi oil tanker getting attacked, which we also have to question. Why did the media turn against Saudi Arabia so quickly? I mean, was it just the Khashoggi thing alone that caused them to do it? I don't know. I still question that. And I still question this. Like, why are they so against this?
Well,
Like,
I think it's the same reason why they don't like the good people on both sides thing is because they're like, well, first of all, Khashoggi was one of them. Like, he was a Washington Post journalist, and so it hit them close to home. But then they also just wanted some pretend rhetoric that at least pretended like, okay, we're gonna just say that we're pissed. And like the fact that Trump didn't even give them that, like, he didn't care at all. I think they just really, really are pissed about that alone. Like, you know, even if the policy didn't change, they just wanted something to just make it seem like Trump gave a shit about the fact that a Washington Post journalist got dismembered in an embassy.
yeah, I mean, that whole thing is still fascinating to me. And just a total side note, but I think this is worth mentioning. People should go check out Sebastian Gorka's most recent appearance on C-SPAN, where he does he takes calls. I was really surprised by how clever he sounded during this interview. I mean, just this C-SPAN appearance, where he got calls from people actually asking why Trump claims to be an anti-interventionist when he's trying to do a coup in Venezuela. And what I was surprised by is Sebastian Gorka had all these like stock responses where he was actually stealing rhetoric from the anti-imperialist left to argue and like concern troll people. And I was like really surprised by it because I never heard anybody in the Trump administration talk this way. And he kept using this phrase, the fake news industrial complex.
What?
Yeah. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting.
That is so nuts.
Yeah. And then he went on to talk about how Khashoggi's murder, he basically made it seem like Khashoggi was part of the Muslim Brotherhood and was like part of a Muslim Brotherhood conspiracy. And that's why it wasn't that big of a deal that he was murdered.
Of course.
The whole appearance needs to be watched because I believe that there are people in the Trump administration who understand the power of acting anti-interventionist and stealing rhetoric from the left to use to try to just like elevate themselves or just like use what works, use what sticks.
Yeah.
And I think this Sebastian Gorka interview was interesting for that reason. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he's still advising the Trump administration.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're smart in the sense that they know that pandering to anti-interventionism is popular. Like, it's something that works.
Bannon understood that totally well, too.
Yeah. Dude, exactly. And that's why Trump used the rhetoric during the campaign trail. It's like, of course, people don't, if you're going to just question any average American on the street, like, no one's going to agree that we have a military this big, that we're squandering all our resources, that we're allies with people like Saudi Arabia. So it's like that rhetoric definitely works, and they know how to use it to their advantage, for sure. They're just smart operators in that sense.
Absolutely. I've come away from this just not understanding what the Trump administration's play here is.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe Trump wants another photo op. You know, maybe he wants a photo op with the Iranian president, shaking hands with him again. I mean, I don't know. Maybe he is going to try to do his own deal, you know, just because he didn't like Obama. I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't put anything past Trump in terms of wanting to do a military strike, but it would surprise me if he did something irresponsible enough to get us involved in like any kind of quagmire with Iran, because it'll just blow up in his face.
This is why the sanctions matter, though, so much, because they really are war. And when you're killing tens of thousands of people with sanctions like this, like, it's just a matter of time before an altercation happens, before there's some sort of provocation that you can rationalize military intervention.
Well, yeah, that's what
he's doing.
We've already
right
seen the Trump administration
has
already cleverly tried to set the pieces in motion, do that. The caravan. I mean, come on. And even just saying that like when Maduro said American diplomats need to leave and Trump rebutted with, no, they're staying. You know, that was an attempt to get to start a violent provocation. That's all they would have needed. If Maduro's forces came in and arrested American diplomats in Venezuela, man, that's it. That's all they need.
Right.
You kidding
Yeah,
me?
exactly.
That video footage, that's fucking outrageous.
Right. And why do you think they just invaded the Venezuela embassy here? Is because they know that there is just one more step to something happening to the diplomats that are stationed there.
Well, that's what I was, the whole time when I was paying attention, that I was actually worried that there was going to be some kind of violence done in D.C. I mean,
right.
That's like classic deep state CIA style activity. I mean, that like when they bombed, what's his face?
Oh, yeah. The Chilean.
Yeah. Like on Embassy Row, car bombing. Guy was dismembered on the ground in fucking Washington, D.C., like in broad daylight. Just wanted to add a quick little update here about the news we've been giving you about the build-up towards potential war with Iran. My assessment at first was a little more hopeful than it is now. So I just wanted to make sure before this podcast went out that I didn't sound like I was downplaying the possibility of this based on these recent events, recent developments that have happened. And I'm just going to go into a little bit some of these recent events and how they are turning the tide of not just the way the media is talking about it, but also the way that other Republicans are talking about it. That consensus that wasn't there when we had recorded the episode seems to be forming quite quickly. And I'll explain. So there was one incident that I forgot to mention that was reported on May 16th that Saudi Arabia blamed Iran for a drone strike attack on an oil pipeline. So the Saudi Arabian government claims that Iran launched a drone strike that shut down a key oil pipeline inside Saudi Arabia. It's not actually made clear in this report what pipeline this was. A Saudi newspaper that's close to the kingdom said that we should launch surgical strikes on Iran, meaning the United States should. So that was something that came before all this buildup, that was part of it. Again, they seem to be thinking that generating outrage over Saudi's oil resources being attacked would somehow make anybody want to attack Iran. The only people that would be outraged enough to want to attack Iran based on that are people in the oil industry, people invested in oil companies. But just yesterday, seemingly the provocation that we were fearing would happen happened. U.S. authorities reported that a rocket strike almost hit a U.S. embassy in Iraq. And this is just quite convenient because the United States government already announced they were removing all this personnel from Iraq because of these looming threats from Iran. Seems awfully convenient to me. It's just strange. Strangely convenient that this happened right after. No one actually got injured or killed. And according to Washington Examiner, and a bunch of reports coming out right now that were actually previously skeptical about these threat warnings that the U.S. government was putting out about Iran are now not skeptical anymore, because now that this rocket apparently hit near a U.S. embassy in Iraq, they're all just moving ahead, moving along as if this is a real thing and that it has Iranian fingerprints on it. This is from the Washington Examiner. From May 19th, it says, rocket fired at U.S. Embassy in Iraq, the same model used by Iran. The rocket that exploded Sunday outside the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad is of a design trafficked by Iran and used by Middle Eastern terrorist groups. And I first saw this story with the headline of, didn't say Iran in it. It just used an obscure term that most people who are just peripherally following this wouldn't even know. And it was that the U.S. Embassy was almost hit by a Katyusha rocket. They already know that means it's an Iranian rocket. It's sort of like Novichok with Russia. It's like, oh my God, Novichok was used. It had to have been Russia. It's so specific and so convenient that it cannot be taken at face value. For all we know, somebody else launched this rocket, launched an Iranian rocket at the U.S. Embassy. And actually, did it even happen? I mean, that's the other thing that I'm unclear on. If nobody was injured or killed, what really happened here? There's reports coming from AP showing, a map about where the rocket apparently fell. And this is also something that happened that was reported in some news outlets a few days ago, but it wasn't really confirmed. I didn't see it reported by any big outlets until now. That now Associated Press is actually reporting that employees of, this is a quote from their article from the 19th, that employees of energy giant ExxonMobil have also begun evacuating from an oil field in the southern Iraqi province of Basra. On Sunday, Iraqi oil minister Tamir al-Gabdan said in a statement that he sent a letter to ExxonMobil asking for clarifications over the evacuation, saying the evacuation was because of political tensions in the region and not related to security. Now, at the same time this rocket strike apparently took place, pro-Iran militias, this is according to the Wall Street Journal, denounced the rocket strike near U.S. Embassy in Iraq. It says, hardline pro-Iran militias in Iraq denounced the late-night rocket strike near the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, seeking to distance themselves from an attack that threatens to inflame tensions amid efforts to de-escalate a crisis between Washington and Tehran. Now, simply because of this alleged rocket attack, which we didn't even really know if it actually took place, the Iraqi foreign minister is claiming that it took place. The U.S. Embassy, the people there are saying that it was just an explosion. They're not calling it a rocket attack. They're not saying it was an Iranian rocket. This is all sort of being leaked through the media. So again, we have this interesting effect happen where when Trump somehow develops enough of a consensus, gets the blob enough on his page, the mainstream media starts to act as an instrument for his agenda, which is unusual because normally the mainstream media is just always trying to tear him down or take something he said and make him look like a monster because of it. And he is a monster a lot of the times because of what he says. But this is unusual. This is definitely a difference. CNN yesterday brought on Foundation for Defense of Democracy think tankers to talk about how we need regime change in Iran. Fox News brought on Institute for the Study of War, the Kagan Family War think tank. They brought on General Jack Keane from the Institute for the Study of War, acting as if he has a line into Trump's inner circle and that he understands that the situation is, the plan is actually very clear that the Trump administration has. And he was sort of trying to downplay or reassure the Fox News interviewer that this wasn't rushed, that it was actually very clearly planned out. The Trump administration had a very solid plan here. So things are shifting. This consensus that I was talking about that wasn't formed before, it's forming now. And here's just another example before I sign off on this update, is that Lindsey Graham, he tweeted yesterday that he just received a briefing from National Security Advisor Bolton about escalating tensions with Iran. He says it is clear that over the last several weeks, Iran has attacked pipelines and ships and other nations and created threat streams against American interests in Iraq. He continues on with a second tweet. The fault lies with the Iranians, not the United States or any other nation. If the Iranian threats against American personnel and interests are activated, we must deliver an overwhelming military response. Stand firm, Mr. President. So this is a huge difference between the quotes I read from you of Lindsey Graham from just a few days ago, where he was acting like he wasn't really on board with this because he wasn't in the loop and didn't fully understand these threats. Full-throated endorsement of a neocon regime change operation in Iraq. And additionally, Trump is saber-rattling on Twitter more about Iran. And now what he's saying is much more militaristic. He said 24 hours ago from recording this update on Twitter, if Iran wants to fight, that will be the official end of Iran. Never threaten the United States again. He could be responding to just rhetoric that's coming out of the Iranian government right now. And one example of that I'll read to you was actually a funny statement made by someone in the Revolutionary Guard, who is now, the Revolutionary Guard has now been deemed a terrorist organization by the United States government officially. So the general's name is Major General Hossein Salami, and he was quoted by a local news agency, Fars. He says, the difference between us and them is that they are afraid of war and don't have the will for it. And then he went on to actually kind of mock the United States over 9/11. I don't know if this was like a 9/11 truth wink and nod kind of jab, but it still was funny. And I'll read to you what he says. He says, the U.S. political system is full of cracks. Though impressive looking, it has osteoporosis. In fact, America's story is like the World Trade Center towers that collapse with a sudden blow. I mean, he's not wrong. It is kind of, it's a good analogy. So that's the update right now. And I think that this is actually getting more serious than I previously believed. We should definitely not take these threats lightly. Just because there's some stumbling blocks along the way, again, the American empire is an unstoppable train. The U.S. government and the U.S. military have done such heinous things in the past. They're ready to do the craziest shit you can imagine. And I think that we need to take that very seriously.